We've all probably at some point in our life been in a state of sadness. The world just feels difficult. Doing things feels tiring and heavy. We doubt our choices and how we got to the place that we want to be, and we might just want to escape and do nothing. I've definitely been there. But on the other hand, I've also often been someone who is very light and happy and loves her life and enjoys people and doing things and is excited and positive and optimistic about everything. And so I think, what is the difference between these two versions of myself? Beyond obvious life circumstances and the natural fluctuations in our state of being, is there something that perhaps for me changes my perspective and the way that I approach the world? And I think that this really has to do with the core of what I believe to be true and the lens with which I see the world. Because I think that the thing that has the biggest impact on my results, on my work, on the way that I feel, the things that I believe, the way that I make other people feel, is what I think is true. So my lens is actually the thing that has the highest leverage for me to explore and change. I find that it can completely change the trajectory of my life and my experience of life much more than anything that I can see or do or optimize in any other sort of way. As Carl Jung said a lot better than me, until you make the subconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. And so in this attempt to understand myself better, I've always gone back to my parents, because I think that they are the ones who have set what I believe to be true and what I internally experience to be my way of viewing the world, either intentionally or unintentionally, with their behavior or rules or things that they have set, or either with me kind of misinterpreting the things that they have done to me or in their life. I have created a very rigid set of assumptions and beliefs which I carry subconsciously in the world. I almost never question, I didn't even realize that were there, but which dictated so much of how I felt, how I behaved, and therefore how people around me felt and behaved too. I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I could talk about it for days, but in this video I have put together the 5 top things that I have misinterpreted, misinternalized, the beliefs which I was carrying, which I think were false and wrong and very dangerous, and which have had the biggest negative impact on my life when they were there, and which I have either completely shifted or am working towards shifting right now in my life, and I feel have had the biggest impact on my experience of the world and who I am as a person. Because I think that when I was younger, I blamed my circumstances a lot for the way that I felt, but now as an adult, I think that there are not enough things or happiness in the world for me to feel good when my internal kind of radar or my perspective and my lens is wrong or broken, and therefore fixing this or attempting to fix this is something that I am incredibly passionate about, and my childhood is where I think I have found a lot of these solutions. Now, I just want to say I am absolutely not a therapist, and the things I'm going to be mentioning today are things that are just kind of conclusions from my own personal experience and my own life and ways that I view the world. So I just want to say, please take everything with a huge grain of salt. And also, if you have legitimate resources that would be helpful, please let me know, because the things that I'm saying are based more on therapy and reading a lot of parenting books and reading some psychological studies or psychological books in general, but through Elizabeth's perspective rather than some universal truth. So I might be stating things as fact, but they are, in the end of the day, just my opinions for the most part. So let's jump straight into it. So the very first thing I wanted to start from is something that I am currently working on and struggling with, which I wish someone would have explained to me a lot sooner. And this is a sense of proper boundaries. I feel that when you are potentially a child that has parents who are quite overbearing, who make a lot of assumptions for what you should do and what you shouldn't do, who have a very rigid set of rules, who kind of assume that you are going to do things for them or for yourself when they are due, and who don't really take your kind of feelings into consideration or your reaction into consideration, then that can lead to you almost never exercising that muscle of knowing what you want or setting a boundary between yourself and your parent. So I feel as though when that boundary is crossed very often, it can lead to the assumption that it's okay for people to say what you should do, to say what you should do with them, and to kind of dictate things or to make yourself uncomfortable in order for someone to be content or to be happy. And although in the majority of cases this is absolutely fine because most people are nice and kind, it can lead to very problematic situations if you are unable to say that you are not comfortable with something or you don't want to do something. And that might just lead to exhaustion on your end, or it can lead to obviously very dangerous things. The ridiculous thing I find about the situation and myself is that there are obvious things that I believe, but there are the truths that I actually live my life based on, which I don't want to admit or never consider. So for example, if we consider healthy boundaries, or to be healthy, the fact that most adults should be able to say what they want and what they don't want. All people are equal. People have the right to express their needs. People should have what they like. People should politely be able to say no. I obviously believe that this is true, but if you ask me how often do I actually do these things, and do I realistically behave in a way that these are true, the answer is no, I don't. And this is where things become problematic, because even though on the surface these are easy and obvious, I don't behave in the way that they are true, so I don't actually believe that these things are true for myself. And this is a problem. I think that the lack of boundaries can express itself as just being someone who really struggles saying no to things, someone who might avoid social situations because they struggle to say no to things, someone who doesn't know where to draw a line or say what they want, and kind of be described as just you're easygoing, anything is fine. Or at the very extreme end, just not even knowing what you want ever, or really, really struggling to make choices in general because you've never exercised that muscle of, am I okay with this? Is this okay for me? And of course, you can have all of these characteristics and have very healthy boundaries, but I think in my instance, and for some people that I know, they are actually an expression of this deeper lack of ability to do these things at all. For me, the first time I realized this was in my mid-20s, when one of my friends would always ask me when we were making plans or choosing something, hey Lizzie, are you okay with this? And it will sound very stupid, but this question would make me feel quite uncomfortable and take me by surprise, because it wasn't a pattern or a normal part of my behavior when I agreed to things or when things were decided around me to actually think, am I okay or not okay with this thing? And when it's very small things like where you're going for lunch, it can make it very obvious that you are not in the habit of doing this thing. And I think from there, I started to realize that this is something that needs to change. Of course, I don't mean that we don't take other people's feeling into consideration, but I think that at the extreme, one can have a lack of ability to take their own feelings into consideration, to be able to healthily express them or to be able to recognize them at all. And I think in my instance, and if you resonate with this, the things that I've been doing recently is whenever there's a decision to be made or something that is happening with myself and people around me, I just give myself a bit of extra time to just do that extra step manually, because it's not part of my automatic programming to go, are you okay with this? Is someone kind of impinging on your boundary? Are they making assumptions about you and coming closer into your decision making the way that perhaps has happened in my past? Or are you truthfully okay with this? And I think that this step has to be a bit manual for me, and I still struggle with it, but I think it's helpful to do it at that time. Also understanding where this came from, so understanding that it can come from things being taken away from you or being given to you, decisions being made for you, never actually being asked if you are comfortable or okay with something or what you truthfully want, never being truly given the space or to develop a sense of identity or the freedom to be accepted no matter what you do. I think this is where these things come from. And of course they can come from a very benevolent space of parents wanting the best for their children, but it can also lead to this issue of not actually being a capable adult in some shapes or forms, in my instance, I think. Setting good boundaries, realizing that all people are equal and they have their own rights. You are probably, if you have poor boundaries in this direction, you might very easily realize when you are asking something of someone else and requesting something of someone else or making an assumption for someone. So I think kind of reflecting that back on ourselves and thinking, is this being done to me right now? And am I actually comfortable with this is very, very helpful. And also I found that I lacked the language to express my needs. And this is something that I have worked a lot on. So it's not only recognizing what you want in some instances, but not knowing what to say. So for example, I didn't know that it was okay for me to leave a situation by saying, thank you, everyone. I had a great time. I will be leaving now. It sounds so obvious, but the lack of this phrasing means that I could be sat in a situation that I'm very uncomfortable in, or that I don't want to be in, or that I'm done with, because I lack the ability to say, oh, I have the space to be my own person and to say that this is not right for me and I can now leave. So it sounds like really childish things, but trust me, it makes a huge difference in your sense of self. So boundaries, very, very important. The second pillar or perspective that I've been working on from my childhood is that of attachment and attachment styles. And this is something I am absolutely not taking credit for. It is a huge branch of human psychology and actually very interestingly, human attachment styles have been one of the studies in psychology that have had the most evidence to support them, which is saying something as far as psychological studies go. So it's really, really great. There's attachment styles for children and both for romantic relationships and adults. So this is very interesting to explore. But basically, what attachment in a nutshell means for me is not only attachment around romantic relationships and family, because those are very, very challenging to start with because they're so emotionally charged and difficult. But basically, attachment for me extends to every person that I have interactions with in my life. And questions that I would ask myself are not for specific situations, because of course they would depend on the person, but as a theme across my life with people I am in contact with. Do I feel comfortable around people? Do I feel that I can trust people? Do I feel happy in others' company? Do I get maybe too close to people too fast, or faster than other people do? Or do I distrust people for a very long time? Am I capable at all of having stable and loving and consistent friendships over years, or relationships over years with different people? These are the questions that I would ask that would kind of help me see where I might have gaps or issues or challenges with attachment and relationships in general. I think this is a very interesting point because it involves basically the rest of the world. So I think it's something that I very guiltlessly kind of work on and think about. I think I've realized in myself that when it comes to interactions with other people, I can quite often kind of lean towards being slightly detached. And I think the reason for this is potentially because when we are children, we are quite vulnerable and we have a lot of needs that need to be fulfilled by people around us. And when those needs are consistently not fulfilled, then we might feel as though we are undeserving of the things that we need, or we might feel as though we are just not heard or not listened to, and therefore that we must be self-sufficient and complete everything ourselves. This is just my theory on this. And I think that a huge aspect of this, which is perhaps less considered, is the whole field of emotional needs, because I feel as though a lot of parents that I've spoken to, or even a lot of adults in the world, do not even consider emotional needs as something that is relevant to a human being's kind of growth. And things tend to go, well, you know, you're fed and you have a roof over your head. What else do you need? You're fine. And if you are consistently shut down as a child, I think, regarding your emotional needs and your emotional support, then you might come to the place where you don't trust that the world is able to even do this, and you don't even express them, recognize them, or state them, and you try to kind of just do everything yourself. And I think this is the kind of tendency that I have. When it comes to attachment to other people, I've shifted my perspective on what I think true independence means, because while in the past I thought that it meant that I would one day be able to get everything that I want by myself, I think that's still true. I probably can, in some indirect way, pay or get anything that I need. I think that true independence is recognizing that I have permission by myself to let other people do things that I need for myself. And I think that is much more difficult, advanced, and healthy. Also, very importantly, when it comes to attachment and my relationships with other people, at the moment when I do something bad, I think that when I was behaving in that way that I regret, what need of myself was I trying to fulfill? Because I think behind any sort of overreaction or any sort of regrettable behavior, there is always a need that I am trying to fulfill for myself. And I think it's the same for most people. And very often, the worse the reaction or the worse the behavior, the more neglected that need is. And so I ask myself, do I need to believe that this person likes me? Do I need to believe that I am worthy? Do I need some support or reassurance? Or do I have a deep fear here about abandonment that's being triggered? And I try to think that, how do I express this need in a more healthy way? And what have I done in this interaction or this attachment with this person that I have left this to be so neglected? And why have I not verbalized this to start with? This might be very extreme, but when it comes to interpersonal relationships, I truly believe that we all have the ability to make people feel the way that we felt when we were younger. And I think every person's natural vibe is a reflection of the state that they were in when they were young. So I feel as though some people who make you feel nice and positive and warm might have had that sort of situation created for them when they were younger. And on the opposite end, when people make you feel belittled or threatened or scared, that might be the way that they were made to feel as children. And I don't think it's just this dichotomy. Obviously, there are people who go through very challenging childhoods and end up being absolutely the best people in the world. But I think that it can be the case that this might happen. And I kind of really want to explore what is the state that I felt the most when I was younger, and how am I potentially recreating these sort of situations for other people, or recreating this in the environment that I have around me, because no matter what, I think we will be very familiar with the states that we felt when we were growing up and when we were young. So I think that this forms the basis of my attachment and my interpersonal relationships, which is very, very important to me. My third point is something which is perhaps also reflected in the way that I do things online maybe, which is my sense of worth and how this has been set for me as a child. So I think for whatever reason, when I was young, I had no separation between the results of my performance and myself. And so whenever I was rewarded or punished for doing something, I took this to be a reward or punishment or a measurement for my worth as a human being. Of course, this was subconscious, but this was the way that I felt. And I did not recognize that this was the case until very, very recently. So basically what this means is when I behaved in a way that my parents approved of, or when I did things that were accepted by my caretakers or people who were due to love me or who loved me, when this behavior was done properly or within the rules or the way that was expected, then I got rewarded. And reward could be lack of punishment, it can be acceptance, or it can be, in the most extreme case, just love and positive things. And on the other end, when things did not go according to plan, or when things did not do as well, or when I made mistakes or behaved wrongly and I was punished for these things, either with withholding love or withholding acceptance or flat out rejection, then, or pure acts of punishment, then that can be internalized as me not being a worthy person. And I created a very binary system of me being worthy or unworthy, and never saw this as just a reflection on my results, but saw this as a reflection on me as a human being. And this is a very dangerous place to be in. And although initially this was just a setup for me that I internalized when I was younger, I fully created this as the default in my mind, where constantly I am fighting against the feeling of feeling unworthy, because hopefully no one's ever experienced this before, but if you've ever experienced the feeling of not being a worthy human being, it is very extreme. It's very, very painful, distressing, and you want to avoid it, obviously, as much as you can. And this living life playing this game where I would set up these standards for what would be acceptable for me, for what would be lack of punishment, and to maintain this fluctuating level of worth is a very, very difficult, painful game that you just cannot win, because the older I got, the more ridiculous my standards got, and it almost became impossible for me to feel worthy at any point in time, because I'm a much stricter person with myself than my parents ever were with me, for example. I think one of the most important things I had to realize as an adult is the view that self-worth is not fluctuating. Self-worth does not change. Self-worth is what it is. It's a packet, and we're all given it when we are born, and we all have the equal amount. All people are the maximum amount of worthy that they can be. Nothing will change that. And especially with myself, this is not a game. This is not something that I play with, because it's absolutely anguishing to feel that your worth is going down. On the other hand, the performance of the things can obviously change. I can feel some days that I love myself less. I can feel some days that I am less beautiful, or I am more ugly, or that I am more stupid that day, or more tired that day, or just feel bad about myself. That's absolutely fine. That can all change. But the worth, the core sense of deserving things that you have, or deserving good things, or deserving to be alive, that thing should not be touched, in my opinion. And I think that this shift and this kind of untangling my performance from my worth has been very, very, very important for me, because even though on the outside, and this is the issue with all of these things, because in every instance, these behaviors, I think, persist as an adult, and they can lead to quite high functioning adults because they express themselves in ways that are rewarded by the community. So in the first instance, if you have poor boundaries, you're just really polite and you're like a nice, easygoing person, which is great, obviously. And then in this case, if you are the sort of person who is super ambitious and works really, really hard and just does not rest, and on the outside that can look like such a positive thing, while on the inside it very often can be fueled by someone who is just trying to run away from that core belief in their mind that they need to do these things in order to just be able to sleep that night, because otherwise they will completely hate themselves and be utterly devastated. I think there's a huge difference in the perspective in both of these instances, and that feeling of fluctuating self-worth is just an anguishing feeling that is very familiar to me, but one which I absolutely despise, and I'm trying so hard to kind of remove. And I think this is something that I've made quite a lot of progress on, I think. In this instance, I think firstly recognizing, do you feel that your self-worth fluctuates a lot? And some way to do this is that if you underperform, or if you don't do as well as you expected, how devastating is that for you? Are you completely destroyed emotionally? Are you embarrassed by yourself? Do you feel like you should punish yourself? Do you feel that you had to perform better? Do you take absolutely no excuses and just like grind all the time? And how would you feel if you had to do maybe a bit less? And how tragic would that be for you? But I think the experience is the thing that makes a difference, because these are not things that we say externally. These are ways that you can only tell about yourself. So how does your chest feel, and how do you feel if you don't do as well as you think you can do? And is your self-worth tied to your performance in any way, and do you want it to be? Because if you have this dichotomy and this game where you have to quieten the lack of self-worth in your mind, then do you want to play that game? Because it's set up for you because of whatever reason, because of your childhood perhaps. Do you still want to take that on? Like, you can make a choice to kind of remove that and see things differently, which I think is very, very important. Realizing what is your default, because are you starting your day, are you starting a task, are you starting your week, are you starting your year from a place of feeling worthy and feeling confident and secure in yourself? Or are you starting every single task with the thought of, you must do this because otherwise you're stupid? This is another evidence that you are lazy and you are bad and you are terrible at doing things. And I think this difference makes a huge change in how the results that you get. Even though you're the same person, you have the exact same things, just starting from a different place, I think can make things a lot easier or difficult for you. So I think recognizing that self-worth is something that we're not touching, and relying on that and seeing that and taking, like, lowering the consequences and the risk in everything that you attempt, because otherwise you would be completely emotionally destroyed. There's so many things that I avoided because I knew that if I didn't perform well at those things, then my self-worth would be completely trashed and I couldn't take it. And I think kind of decoupling these things means that the only thing that you're putting at risk is your performance in that task, which realistically for many tasks does not matter. For some it would, but for many tasks it does not matter, rather than tying your self-worth to absolutely everything, seeing it go up and down every day and just being completely exhausted by your feelings and by the amount of punishment that you need, and maybe not even being able to feel okay or to give yourself the self-love that you at one time, a long time ago, got, perhaps because you performed the way that you should have done at the time. So self-worth being decoupled, unfluctuating, being your default of having a maximum amount of self-worth when we approach tasks and our life and our day and our week, I think is a much healthier way to approach life, and leads to much, much more happiness. Next, I am wading straight into controversial waters, but realistically, I don't care. This is how I feel about this thing for now. Basically, my next point is around conditional love, because I think when it comes to parent-children relationships, there should be no such thing as conditional love. You should not have to earn love from your parents. Your parents should love you unconditionally all of the time. I think that this should be obvious. And I think in order to be a well-adjusted and safe adult, you have to have had this example from your parents or caretakers when you were younger, or at least have a space where you felt unconditionally loved. And if you did not have that, I think perhaps exploring it in adulthood is something that is very, very necessary, because I think either explicitly or implicitly as children, we can internalize the view that if we behave in certain unacceptable ways, or if we do certain things, or if we express too much need for love, then we will be rejected. And either not being given unconditional love or being flat out rejected from a parent, I think is one of the things that can lead to devastating emotional consequences, and our sense of self-worth and our kind of safety in the world, I think, can be greatly affected by this. I really appreciate that. Unfortunately, this is not often the case, but I truly believe that as adults, we can analyze this and we can think about this and we can generate such relationships and such understanding, and take away blame from children or from ourselves when we were children around the way that we were treated, or the lack of love, or the love that we received at the time, because I think that children are completely innocent and they are deserving of unconditional love, and where that is not the case, that can be quite problematic. And even beyond this, I think love is a very difficult situation, because if you are a child and you've received any sort of humiliation or any sort of abuse or any sort of kind of being demeaned or any kind of strong negative impacts or punishments from your parents while your parents told you that they loved you, I think this can be very confusing for children, because we internalize the view that people who love us can do these things to us, or this is an expression of love, or not necessarily a good thing, of course, but we think that it is allowed for people who love us to do these things. And I think that this is just really, really bad, and it's very dangerous to carry a flawed perception of what love is in the world. And this is definitely not the case, because the things that we experience as children, this is the core of everything, is that we assume that these things are true just by virtue of this is all that we've known. And especially if you were an isolated child, or if you didn't get enough examples, or you didn't compare your life as much with others, then you kind of think that what you have is true and and is real, and we kind of don't question these things even as adults. And I think these flawed perceptions of what true love is or what love can be especially dangerous. They make you potentially a dangerous parent, they make you potentially a dangerous partner, or potentially a dangerous friend or someone in the world. And I don't want to over dramatize, maybe dangerous is too strong of a word, but maybe just a maladaptive person or a non-ideal partner or parent. So I think it's kind of our responsibility to re-examine these things and see if they are true. I remember once reading in a book by a psychologist that said that there is such a thing as couples who don't argue and who don't fight. And I thought this was completely crazy in my mind, because I think I don't know if it's just accidentally me, but if most of us have heard that relationships are a lot of hard work and that everyone fights and that it's like completely normal to have these things, but the book said that's not true. And I've since quote it a lot from many psychologists, and I think people should talk about this a lot louder, that there is such a thing as parents who don't demean you, or there is such a thing as couples who don't aggressively fight with one another, or who just agree on things, or who respect each other's boundaries, and who have healthy communication realistically for the rest of their lives. So I think that this is just something that, if you have not seen it in your life as a child, and if you've explicitly been told that this cannot be the case and what you are seeing is normal, then you internalize this as being normal, and especially might lead to blaming yourself for not having or creating these situations, which can lead to a very toxic cocktail of emotions and interpretations of the world. So in short, I do think that parents should give children unconditional love. There is such a thing as unconditional love in a parent-child relationship. I'm not sure how I feel about other relationships, but definitely in a parent-child relationship, I definitely think that this is possible and should be a kind of basic right that we have. And if we were not afforded this, or if we're not given this, then we have a responsibility as an adult to analyze that, kind of get over the complexes that this might have given us, and especially rectify it in our future generations and in the relationships that we create. And I think this analyzing of what is normal and what is baseline, and comparing this with what is perhaps healthy, is a very good way to, I think, analyze and understand what we've been through and who we are and how perhaps things are not ideal. See, the thing that I've internalized from my childhood, which I perhaps hate the most, or that's difficult, I don't know, but something that I really hate is my self-talk. And I think I realized this a few years ago, where for those of us who do have an internal voice, because I know some of us don't think in voices, I do have an internal voice, so the thing that reads in my mind, and when I think of things at night or in the shower, I can hear a voice in my head. That person is kind of like the worst version of my mom, like the angriest, most impatient, just has not slept in 2 days and is just fuming, everything has gone wrong version of my mom. And that's the baseline with which I talk to myself. And I only realized this very recently in terms of, that's not great, obviously, because it means that the way that I do things and the actions that I take are usually done through quite an abusive voice in my mind. And this is obviously not good. And I think that maybe analyzing this, and hopefully it's not the case for everyone, but kind of thinking that how much of our parents is the part of ourselves that makes us do things. Because in a way, I do think that we're all parents for ourselves. Like, we make ourselves wake up and go to sleep at a certain time, and we have expectations about ourselves, and we tell ourselves when to start working and when to stop working, and we are the ones that reward and punish ourselves as adults. So we're kind of parenting ourselves in a way, and realizing that have we modeled this parenting behavior from the unideal version of one of our parents, or the worst version of our parents, or even worse than the worst version of our parents? And is that something that we want, and can we change this? Because I think that self-talk is absolutely essential, and I do think that there is a separation there, and it's very interesting because there is in a way a separation between who we are and what we experience and what we talk and say to ourselves, and that person almost has a personality that can be adjusted and analyzed and can and should be changed, I think, when it leads to kind of difficulty or not great experiences of the world, or at least just question, because I think everything should be questioned, even if it's fine and perfect. Now, before I completely wrap up, I want to thank the sponsor of this video, which are surprisingly very relevant to this topic. I'm very interested into peeking into family dynamics and seeing how these interactions and things work, and especially the progression and kind of hypothesizing how things might affect the children or relationship with one another, or trying to interpret what might be happening in someone's internal world and how that might express itself verbally or otherwise. But when I actually got to try NordVPN to make this video, I thought this is actually something quite legit, and that if there's anyone out there who has potentially slipped through the cracks of trying something like this, it's absolutely incredible. And the reason for that is that there are a few TV shows that I'm going to mention which are not accessible depending on your geographic location, or who get removed from one part of Netflix or one part of something else and you can't see it elsewhere. And I never thought to actually try a VPN to solve this problem. Now that I sent my VPN to Finland, which I would recommend by the way, you get HBO Nordic, which is like a streaming service which has a lot better movies than Netflix actually. If you do end up getting access to HBO Nordic, then what you can do is watch Divorce, which is a really, really good series about a couple who are breaking up, and you can kind of watch in a very realistic but safe way, because it's not real, the experiences, the communication, and the impact that this has on the children of this couple, which I find to be a very, very good exploration of what is going on. Also, something else which I would really appreciate if someone gave back to me, because I used to watch this in Netflix, but it's been removed from Netflix UK. But Dr. Foster is a really, really, really good TV show, which I think is one of my favorites when it comes to human psychology. Again, it explores a dysfunctional couple who are breaking up, and the main protagonist is a doctor, and you see this woman go through basically a crazy, crazy breakdown, and both of them have behaviors which are completely unacceptable, but kind of help you realize that very stable and otherwise well-adjusted people can behave in extreme ways if their issues are not addressed quite early on and quite well. So this is something that I would very recommend. There's also a child involved in this movie, the child of the couple and another new baby, but I'm not going to spoil it for you. I would really, really watch it, and I would love a recommendation for where I can find to stream this. So if you don't already have a VPN, apart from the safety things which are apparently very helpful, most importantly in my instance, finding series and finding good movies from around the world, wherever you would want to, is a great use of resources and making the most out of the subscriptions that you already have. I will have a link in my description. It gives you 2 years of access plus an extra month on top of things, and you can always cancel it within 30 days if you don't like the series or if you don't find this helpful. But on that note, thank you so much to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. And on the note of adulting and parenting oneself, I just want to say, if there's anyone left here, because in the end of the videos there's usually just a few of us, hi, thank you for watching. And also, I think that this is one of the topics that I am the most interested in life. And if you resonated with me, I just want to say, hi. And I just hope that we find the strength to kind of get through things, improve, feel better, and that this process, I think, in my experience, at least so far, has been the most worth it thing in my life. So hopefully I will maybe see how this video does and what the reaction is, and if this is actually as helpful, or if I'm able to express things in a way that is as helpful to others as I have been to myself, or people who have helped me in this direction have been to me, then maybe this is an avenue that I will explore. If there are any questions, genuinely, either email me, or comments are a great place to kind of let me know. Otherwise, if you made it so far, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Be kind to yourself and others, and don't believe everything you think. Thanks.